Hey guys, Taki here. It's been over 7 months since I made my first video showcasing the RuneScape mobile beta client, and since that point, I've probably invested more playtime than any other beta tester. With iOS testing in the future, and hopefully more mobile development in the months to come, I thought it was a good time to take a look at the mobile client to talk about what it does well, what issues currently exist, and what features need to be added in the future to make this a compelling and successful application. Quick little disclaimer, I'm not going to go into exactly how much playtime I have on mobile, but my hardcore Ironman is currently at 2K total just using the mobile client, so you can use your imagination. Your mileage may vary on some of these things that I'm going to describe in this video, but it shouldn't by too much. At this point, I've pretty much tested the entire game, save about 100 quests. First, I want to talk about what I think the client does well, and there are a ton of things that it does do well. The best way to judge a port of any game is by its functionality and usefulness. If you've ever played a port of an RPG series like Final Fantasy, you know that this can go pretty poorly, but that's not the case here. The Ribbon UI, Chatbox, and Globes all do a great job of adapting a multitude of various functions into something that looks visually appealing, so much so that I've grown to want something like this in the desktop client. You can also judge this by how easy or difficult it is to accomplish things versus just using a computer. And you go into this thinking that you're going to make some form of a compromise. A good example of this would be comparing the old school mobile RS client to the vanilla desktop client. Everything is there, and you can do anything you want, but that's when you're only comparing it to the vanilla client. If you try to compare it to a third-party client, you'll instantly feel like you're giving up so much to be able to have the luxury of playing it on mobile. Now, I'm not going to lie and say that there aren't big compromises that you have to make with RuneScape 3 Mobile, but you will genuinely find that they are not really handicapping you that much. I mean, sure, it sucks ass solving clue scrolls on mobile without the aid of Alt1 Toolkit, and you can't just spacebar through all of your quests. But the experience is pretty much the same for the majority of the player base that doesn't use those add-ons. The things that you will do on mobile are as easy, if not easier, than their desktop counterparts. The second most important thing to any application has to be stability. No one is going to play an application that crashes all the time. The user experience would be trash, and the backlash would be enormous on social media and App Store reviews. This again is going to be largely dependent on the device that you're playing on, but I can honestly say in hundreds of hours of playtime doing almost every piece of content in the game, the client has never once crashed on me. This is made more impressive when you take into account all of the strange and unsupported ways that I've run this client. I've done portrait mode, dual client, split screen, floating YouTube overlay, and AFK skilling with the screen locked, all with no issues. How many developers have users that can say something like that? This blends a little with the third thing on this list that I feel the application does well, and that's data usage. Taking a look at my data usage for last month, I've used an average of 5 megabytes an hour, which doesn't exclude downloading updates to the cache. Even if I take a look at data usage for this month, I very rarely have days that I go over 20 megabytes. This makes the game excellent for slow data speeds. I've had no issues playing this all the way from Edge to 4G LTE. If you want to lower your rates, make sure you're downloading the full cache on Wi-Fi before using your mobile data. You can check this by swiping down on the screen with 4 fingers and then typing in display FPS. The last good thing that I want to talk about before moving on is performance. When I'm talking about performance, I'm talking about two things: FPS and battery life. This is going to again depend on the device that you're playing on, but I can say after testing a few devices that you can expect good performance from any device that has more than 2 GB of RAM and a Snapdragon 636 or better. This should give you 60 FPS in most locations, although I tend to switch to 30 when I'm not going to be recording to save battery life. Battery life is also good, assuming you're using a modern device. With a 4000 mAh battery, I'm getting anywhere between 6 to 10 hours of screen time depending on how I'm playing the game. With that, I also haven't had any issues with the game causing my phone to slow down or heat up. Now let's talk about what's bad with this application. And the first one we have here is the lack of customization options. Without doing any stuff under the hood, you have very limited customization options when you're playing on mobile. You have a ribbon menu that you can customize. You can show or hide your globes, chat window, map, and action bars, and you can set up one additional action bar. You can't change your widescreen aspect ratio map that's terrible for actual use. You are going to wish you had a portrait map because this thing isn't going to let you move very far before you have to tap on the screen again unless you rotate the screen to be able to use the map sideways. Like the name suggests, you're going to want to use this application when you're out and about, and when you're walking around with the game open, you're going to wish that you had the ability to run the game in portrait mode, but this is something you cannot enable without getting some third-party applications. There are going to be times when you're sitting down or riding on a bus that it wouldn't matter if you were to hold this thing with two hands, but when you have to walk around or genuinely don't want to look super stupid holding your phone advertising to the whole world that you're playing a video game, you're going to want to hold this in portrait mode for functionality. I tested this out doing a Reaper task a couple of weeks ago, and I was able to do an entire lap around a large lake, all while holding and using my phone with one hand. There were no performance drops, I didn't feel like I was disadvantaged, it genuinely flowed very well. The second bad part about using this application is actually something that didn't exist last year when I made my other videos, but it's something now that you're forced into if you were to play on the mobile client, and that's going to be the RuneScape mobile loading screens. You used to have the ability to turn these off inside the graphics menu, but for whatever reason, that was taken away from us completely. This may not seem like it's going to be a big deal, but it does make anything that involves travel significantly slower than it used to be. The worst place for this so far that I've found is occasionally during Barrows runs, where you can at times get a loading screen when you first go down into the tunnels, and then you can get a shorter loading screen in between each of the passageways, which is completely ridiculous. Moving on, we have a ton of CPU melting fire animations that will rape your phone and FPS, and these things are sprinkled out throughout the game. To this point, I found 3 instances of these animations while playing on my Hardcore Ironman, and 2 of them came from quests that almost killed me due to the FPS meter dropping into the low single digits. This is something that wouldn't affect you at all on desktop, but it will end your life on a phone. The worst culprit for this so far has been Ivan from the Underground Pass quest, who literally almost 360 no-scoped my hardcore with his fire spray on the ground. It took me by surprise, and it was almost impossible to dodge. Another culprit of this is Vindicta, whose Vindicta fire attack will damage you in-game while also burning a really cool 15 to 20 FPS off your phone. And last on this list are the lack of options for your combat UI. As it stands, you have access to a single action bar with 14 buttons that you can interact with, which is a large step down from the multiple bars that you have access to on desktop. You might not think that this is going to be a problem, but you will have to sacrifice a ton of utility in order to get any decent amount of DPS out. Making matters worse is the fact that you might think you can solve this by just turning on full manual so you have access to 2 action bars, but the moment you turn on manual, the bottom bar disappears, making that mode a complete joke to try to use on a phone. The way I currently get around this is by setting up my revolution bar with all of the basics that I need done automatically, and then filling my actual useful bar with thresholds, ultimates, food, weapon switches, and spells. So what changes do we need to make the mobile app better? First, we need to have an option to launch and play the game in portrait or landscape mode if we want, and to a lesser extent, we need the ability to split screen, all without using third-party options. We need better options in the graphics menu to allow the game to run smoother on lower performance devices. Things like turning down draw distances of other player models while maintaining world draw distance so other people don't render on your screen when you don't need to see them. We could also use a way of disabling the ability to see other characters' familiars and/or spells and damage effects. It might be also worthwhile to have an option to render all other player models besides the player model that you have at lower resolutions to speed up the game in larger areas. And we also need a way of turning back off the loading screens if we so choose. This is a little bit minor, but it's a quality of life improvement. It would also be nice to have a way of being able to skip through large amounts of chat boxes, as the speed is nowhere close to what it is when you can hold down a spacebar on desktop. There used to be this bug where you'd tap the chat box fast enough you wouldn't be able to interact with it anymore, and that's been patched, so thank God, but it's still nowhere close to the speed of holding down a spacebar, and this is really important for doing things like quests. And the final and probably single most important thing is, we need more customization options for our UI. Including how many action bars we have access to at one time, where the ribbon will be placed on our screen, and the shape of our minimap. I hope you enjoyed this retrospective look at the mobile client for RuneScape 3. I'll be sure to cover any major updates that happen to the platform going forward. And with that, can I get a big F in the chat for any iOS users that are still waiting to try this awesome game? That's the end of this one. If you liked the video, consider dropping a like below and subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. Feel free to take a look at one of the videos on screen now, and until next time, Taki out.